You refresh your bank balance, smoothing your expensive sleeve while your hands tremble. In a quiet car, your fingers freeze. The victory lie dissolves. You bought everything you wanted, yet you feel entirely erased. Heavy exhaustion crushes your chest, draining your breath. This hollow numbness is the core engine of your identity. You never chased success, you just built a golden wall so no one could ever touch you. Human consciousness operates under strict laws of balance. When an individual achieves exceptional societal status, an invisible psychic gravity begins to pull in the opposite direction. This psychological gravity ensures that external validation cannot feed the internal landscape. This structural imbalance cannot be resolved by acquiring more assets. Every external addition merely accelerates the inner deficit. Society rewards the creation of a highly functional mask. This mask is known as the persona. The persona is designed to gather resources, recognition, and security. However, the true human identity remains entirely distinct from this public performance. Wealth and status are merely structural achievements of the ego. They do not fulfill the deeper requirements of human consciousness. When the ego mistakes the mask for the true self, an immediate systemic conflict begins. The internal world demands authentic expression. The external world demands continuous performance. This divergence creates an invisible rift within the subconscious mind. The greater the external success, the wider this internal fracture becomes. This is not a personal failure. It is an immutable law of psychic physics. The exhaustion of maintaining this division manifests during the quietest hours of the evening. You sit alone in a beautifully furnished room, deliberately checking your agenda for the next day, while your chest tightens with a sudden, unexplainable dread. This physical constriction is the direct signal of a profound psychological compensation occurring within the unconscious. The conscious mind attempts to rationalize this heavy fatigue as simple professional burnout or temporary stress. In reality, the psyche is suffocating under the immense weight of a completely fabricated identity. Every public praise received by the persona acts as a direct insult to the buried, authentic self. The individual spends their life force executing mental programming designed by parental expectations or societal standards. This continuous betrayal forces the true desires of the individual into the deep shadow, where they remain buried but highly volatile. This creates a devastating evolutionary trap within human consciousness. The very mechanisms that enabled your immense external success are now actively producing your profound internal emptiness. Your discipline, your adaptability, and your focus were all weaponized to construct a life that belongs to someone else. The conscious ego cannot simply think its way out of this systemic paralysis. The mind is trapped in a profound paradox. Using the same ambitious drive that built the cage will only reinforce its bars. This growing internal vacuum is an autonomous mechanism designed to disrupt your stability. The deep psyche is deliberately withholding meaning from your achievements to halt your current trajectory. It is an intentional breakdown of your reality perception. The threat is not the destruction of your life, but the terrifying structural cost of allowing your true identity to finally be born. The surface success has become an unbearable weight, locking the door on your old illusions. A darker, necessary threshold now stands open, forcing a confrontation with the invisible structures that actually govern your choices. You attempt to resolve this persistent emptiness by doubling down on the exact behaviors that earned your current social status. You map out new ventures, optimize your daily habits, and acquire higher markers of prestige, expecting the inner void to finally close. Instead, the emotional deficit expands in direct proportion to your effort. The mechanism is broken. It fails completely. Your conscious intent is being systematically hijacked by an unmapped layer of your own mind. Every calculated strategy to recapture meaning feels like staging an elaborate play for an entirely empty theater. You lie to yourself by pretending that the next milestone will activate the fulfillment you originally simulated to impress others. You are performing contentment. The hidden reality is that beneath your highly structured ambitions lies an autonomous force that refuses to cooperate with your conscious ego. This force is the Jungian unconscious, the buried, unacknowledged self that operates entirely by its own laws. It remains completely insulated from your financial metrics or social rank. This hidden layer is not a malicious enemy or an internal demon trying to fracture your life. It functions like an immutable law of nature, acting with the cold indifference of gravity. Its movement is purely mechanical, yet deeply intelligent, operating with a self-regulating architecture designed to restore internal psychological balance. When you feed only the public mask, this autonomous structure starves your conscious experience of vital energy. It forces an emotional freeze to protect what remains of your genuine human essence. The emptiness you experience is actually a precise, protective shutdown engineered by your deep mind. This realization strips away your illusions of self-mastery, leaving you at a stark systemic dead end. The very intellect you rely on to manage your reality is the exact instrument maintaining your internal paralysis. You cannot negotiate with a force that controls the very metrics of your satisfaction, forcing a descent into the invisible framework that dictates your daily existence. To understand this invisible constraint, one must observe how the deep psyche interacts with daily life. The unconscious mind does not exist as an abstract concept in a textbook. It manifests physically through sudden visceral contractions, unexpected waves of anxiety, and inexplicable behavioral hesitations. It is a living psychological physics that exerts an invisible gravitational pull on your attention. When a specific emotional impulse or authentic desire is consistently denied expression, it does not dissolve. It sinks beneath your conscious awareness and begins to alter your immediate perception of reality. It quietly skews your memory bias, making you hyper-aware of specific threats while blinding you to genuine opportunities for fulfillment. This mechanical shifting of perception gradually hardens into what humans misinterpret as fate. When an individual suppresses their true nature to maintain a flawless public identity, those buried traits accumulate an independent charge. Because the conscious ego refuses to look inward, the psyche is forced to project these hidden elements outward onto the external environment. You begin to attract specific interpersonal conflicts, repetitive career crises, and recurring patterns of betrayal. You perceive these events as accidental misfortunes or external tragedies inflicted by the world. In reality, you are colliding with your own disowned psychology. The external world acts as a massive mirror, forcing you to experience your hidden nature as an inevitable external event. Your unacknowledged shadow is organizing your reality from behind the scenes. This objective mechanism completely shatters the modern illusion of absolute autonomy. What you confidently define as free will is often just the conscious mind retroactively rationalizing a choice that has already been executed by an autonomous inner force. Your conscious intellect acts as a public relations department, inventing neat explanations for decisions born in the deep dark of your psyche. This realization brings an unsettling truth to light. The surface identity you call yourself is not the master of its own house. This structural failure is not a hopeless trap, but a necessary awakening. The neat illusions of your control must crack open so that the vast objective psychological reality operating beneath your awareness can finally be recognized. The human mind does not encounter the external world in its raw form. Just as the human eye can only detect a tiny fraction of the electromagnetic spectrum, completely blind to the vast infrared and ultraviolet frequencies surrounding it, our conscious awareness is restricted to a highly filtered representation of existence. We never interact with reality directly. Instead, we inhabit a landscape of pre-rendered symbols crafted by the deepest evolutionary layers of the human mind. These objective psychic structures filter the overwhelming chaos of reality, presenting the conscious ego with an engineered model designed strictly for survival and social navigation. Wealth, prestige, and status are not objective truths of the universe. They are highly specific symbols within this internal model. When you pursue these markers, you are navigating an internal map, reacting to images that your own psyche has synthesized. The external world you perceive is heavily conditioned by the hidden requirements of your internal architecture. Every achievement you finalize is instantly stripped of its luster, because the mind has already shifted its projection to the next horizon. Your mind projects meaning onto blank objects, convincing you that external acquisition will alter your internal state. You do not see things as they are. You see things as your unconscious needs them to appear to maintain its current structure. This structural understanding completely reframes the profound emptiness that follows your external achievements. This internal isolation is not a temporary emotional malfunction or a biographical trauma to be healed through therapeutic comfort. The friction you feel is a fundamental structural necessity built directly into the architecture of consciousness itself. It is the cosmic anvil on which your actual identity must be forged. The deep psyche deliberately hollows out your external victories to demonstrate that the public mask cannot sustain the weight of a living human being. The internal architecture is operating exactly as intended. The pain is not a mistake. This internal drought is a protective mechanism designed to starve your illusions before they completely consume your capacity for authentic experience. The severe discomfort is the objective psyche actively withdrawing its vital energy from your artificial existence. It forces a structural breakdown so that something genuine can finally be born from the ruins of your ambition. Your failure to find peace in success is the only accurate response to a life built on a counterfeit foundation. The emptiness is an active regulatory force clearing away your false certainties to prepare you for an irreversible shift. You are not merely the prisoner trapped within this invisible mechanism. You are the very architecture that built the cage. The human brain operates under a strictly limited cognitive bandwidth, processing only a tiny fraction of the sensory data streaming from the external world. To manage this infinite chaos without collapsing into sensory overload, your neurology must compress reality into a highly selective world model. This compressed model is not neutral. It is heavily biased, constructed to validate your existing psychological assumptions and protect your established social identity. Your brain selectively emphasizes data that justifies your current choices while completely discarding information that threatens your public persona. This data filtering explains why external success feels entirely hollow when the inner self is neglected. The physical senses register the applause and the material wealth, but the deeper mind refuses to transmit the chemical signals of fulfillment. Every sensory input is color-coded by your internal state before it ever reaches your conscious awareness. If the deep mind rejects your current trajectory, it will strip the color from your environment, rendering your highest achievements entirely gray and lifeless. You are left holding tangible rewards that your perception refuses to taste. This neurological restriction causes distinct psychological leaks where your suppressed self overrides your conscious control. You sit in an important executive meeting, nodding your head in agreement while your hand aggressively grips your pen until your knuckles turn white. This physical tension is an autonomous rebellion against the false role you are playing. You find yourself breaking off eye contact during conversations, your gaze drifting toward the floor as a sudden wave of irritation flares up against an innocent colleague. Your vocal tone drops into a flat, monotone delivery when discussing your latest professional triumph. These physical contractions are the visible cracks in your public mask. Your body is leaking the truth that your intellect is desperately trying to hide. You cannot intellectualize away a physical protest coordinated by your deep psyche. Your suppressed desires force their way to the surface through these unscripted muscle movements and sudden behavioral hesitations. You experience a heavy inertia in your limbs when preparing for an event you supposedly want to attend. Your breathing grows shallow and restricted whenever you are forced to recite your list of accomplishments to others. You are staring directly at the blueprint of your own invisible cage, observing the exact mechanisms that keep you trapped in a life you did not choose. Yet, the very act of recognizing these bars is the precise moment the cage begins to lose its absolute power over your existence. The physical manifestation of a divided identity occurs beneath the threshold of conscious speech. The body carries the weight of a simulated life through a persistent muscular rigidity. The shoulders remain perpetually elevated to brace against an invisible scrutiny. Respiration shortens into a shallow, involuntary rhythm that starves the tissues of oxygen. A subtle, constant tremor develops in the lower eyelids during prolonged focus. The mind enters an unceasing loop of self-monitoring. Every spontaneous impulse undergoes a silent internal censorship before it can manifest. This continuous vetting process drains the individual of instinctual vitality. The internal world becomes a highly policed state where no genuine emotion is permitted to move freely. The intellect acts as a hostile guard, tracking every deviation from the established public script. Sleep itself provides no restoration, transformed instead into a hyper-vigilant scanning for unresolved tasks. This structural fragmentation achieves its absolute peak during moments of complete physical isolation. Consider an individual standing alone on a concrete terrace in the deep freeze of a winter midnight, miles away from any digital network or social obligation. The surrounding landscape is completely dark and entirely silent. There is no audience to impress. There is no reputation to defend. Yet, the internal mechanism does not stop its frantic choreography. The mind continues to perform for an imagined collective eye. The individual evaluates their own posture, judging their inner emptiness against an internalized standard of strength. The social mask has fused so completely with the ego that it demands a performance even in total solitude. The psyche is monitoring its own misery to ensure it looks sufficiently profound. This realization marks the absolute fever pitch of the psychological split. The survival strategy has become so heavy that its internal logic collapses under its own weight. The absurd pressure of performing for a ghost forces the first genuine crack in the artificial identity. This acute confrontation with the performative self is not a descent into permanent madness. It is the necessary diagnostic boundary where the mind finally acknowledges the total bankruptcy of its defensive control structures. This recognition forces an immediate, irreversible shift in the architecture of your awareness. The heavy isolation you endure ceases to be a passive affliction. A profound division occurs within your conscious mind at this exact moment. You are no longer merely generating thoughts. You are actively observing the generation of your thoughts. A heavy wedge drives directly between your defensive rationalizations and your awareness. The frantic internal dialogue begins to lose its absolute authority. You witness the public mask struggling to maintain its grip. The performance continues, but the audience has walked out. You observe the anxiety without becoming the anxiety. The physical tension remains, yet it no longer defines your boundaries. This internal split is not a descent into psychological fragmentation. It is the birth of the objective witness within the psyche. You are not the achievements. You are not the false identity. You are the silent presence observing the entire collapse. You reclaim the ultimate authority over your consciousness. The old identity dissolves, the observer remains. The false architecture fractures. The field opens, the objective psyche speaks. The external noise of your achievements has finally faded into absolute silence. The accounts are full, the status is fixed, yet the vacancy in your room remains heavy and unmovable. You sit still. You breathe. The illusion of your absolute control has cracked open, leaving you entirely exposed to your inner landscape. There is nothing left to acquire. There is no one left to impress. Your profound emptiness was never a malfunction, but a necessary clearance of the false self. In the silence that follows, your conscious identity has finally stood still long enough to recognize its deeper nature face to face. The invisible architecture of your mind is looking back at you, active, unchanged, and ready for a profound partnership.